That afternoon, the Houston sky seemed to unleash its fury upon the earth. Rain pounded relentlessly on the roof of an old house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside the tidy living room, the yellow lamplight cast shadows over every wrinkle on Grace's face. She sat hunched over, patiently mending a small tear on an old sweater, her wrinkled hands moving steadily, a rhythm born from decades of nursing work. The steady sound of rain was almost soothing, until a sudden, piercing noise cut through the calm. The doorbell rang in rapid, urgent bursts, as if the person outside was battling both time and their own dwindling patience. Grace sprang to her feet, the needle still in her hand. She opened the door. Standing before her was Jessica, her daughter, her wet hair clinging to her face and her makeup washed away by the rain, revealing a pale, exhausted expression. Beside her stood a small, skinny boy, shivering from the cold. He clutched a colorful Rubik's Cube tightly in his arms, his entire body soaked and smudged with dirt. Grace froze, her heart tightening. She gasped in disbelief. "Jessica? You came back now, in this heavy rain? Jessica didn't answer. She pushed the door open, slipping inside as if afraid someone was chasing her. Pulling the boy along, she spoke quickly without meeting her mother's eyes. "Mom, can Evan stay here for a few days? Johnny's got something urgent. I have to go with him." Grace's voice dropped. The suspicion in her eyes shifted into clear disapproval. "It's him again, isn't it? How many times have I told you to cut ties with that no-good man? He's just dragging you down, Jessica." Jessica snapped around, her eyes darkening in frustration. Her voice was sharp, stripped of politeness. "Mom, stop bad-mouthing him. You're old, you don't understand anything. I'm just leaving him here for a few days. I'll come right back." Grace didn't answer right away. Her gaze had shifted to the little boy, standing curled up on the cold tile floor. His hair was matted, his glasses fogged with rainwater. But he wasn't crying. He said nothing. He just gently rocked back and forth, absorbed in spinning the Rubik's Cube with an intensity that defied explanation. She bent down, slowly reaching out her hand. Her voice softened. "Evan, come here, sweetheart. You're freezing." "Jessica, how could you let him get this soaked?" The boy didn't move. He kept turning the cube. Jessica just shrugged. "It was pouring. I grabbed him and ran. Didn't have time to grab anything else." Grace fell silent. She knew all too well that this few days Jessica spoke of might stretch into forever. The rushed look in her daughter's eyes, so devoid of guilt or hesitation, had already said more than words ever could. The rain outside showed no sign of letting up, but inside Grace's heart, another storm had begun to stir. Silent and weighty, filled with a sinking sense of dread. The quiet in the small house had barely settled when it was shattered again by a shrill cry. Grace was sitting on the sofa, holding a dry towel in her hands, trying to dry off the little boy who had been brought in as if he were just another item dropped off at the door. But Evan wasn't cooperating. He thrashed and screamed the moment she touched the shoulder of his shirt. His tiny hands batted the towel away, his mouth letting out sharp, piercing sounds that drilled into her ears. Jessica stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression more irritated than concerned. She exhaled sharply. "He's always like that. I don't get it either. Try to touch him and he just screams." Grace kept drying him slowly and gently, but her eyes had grown colder. She paused, then turned to face her daughter. Her voice was low but firm. "I can't take him. I'm old now. I don't have the strength to care for a child, especially not one like him." She couldn't say the word. She didn't want to, but she knew. His eyes, the way he cried, the way he reacted, he wasn't like other children. Jessica let out a dry laugh, her voice thick with sarcasm. "Oh, now you're picky? You used to be a nurse, didn't you? You've taken care of patients 10 times harder than a kid. Or are you just afraid the neighbors will laugh behind your back because your grandson's messed up in the head?" Grace was stunned. She clenched the towel tightly, her eyes burning with fury. Her voice trembled, but each word landed with weight. "Stop it. How can you talk about your own child like that? He's your son. No matter what, he's still a child. He's still a person." Jessica's eyes flared as she shouted, "He's my curse. Because of him, no man wants to come near me anymore. Even Johnny says he's a freak. If you won't take him, fine. I'll dump him at the orphanage gate. Let's see if anyone there will take him." With that, Jessica turned and headed toward the door. Grace sprang up, blocking her path. Her voice was no longer patient. "You can't do this. He's my grandson. He's your son. The least you can do is show a shred of conscience. Are you really going to abandon him like that?" The two women stood locked in a tense standoff right in the doorway. Outside, the rain kept pouring, blowing in and soaking the stained wooden floor. And in the midst of it all, Evan remained curled up in the corner of the room, small and still, like a shadow. Evan sat in the corner of the room, completely removed from the shouting, the tears, the chaos. He twisted the Rubik's Cube in his hands with astonishing speed, as if the entire world had been compressed into those colored squares. Every time his mother screamed, his rocking grew more intense, his fingers moved faster. Grace looked at her grandson, her heart tightening. In the middle of all this turmoil, the boy showed no typical reaction. No fear, no crying, no calling for his mother. He was lost in his own world, one no one else could reach. She turned to Jessica, her voice pleading. The anger was gone now, replaced by a deep, aching helplessness. "Jessica, please listen to me. Stay. Let's take care of him together. Leave that man. I'm begging you." Jessica pulled her arm away, her eyes now stripped of even coldness. They were empty. "Enough. It's my life. I'll live it how I want. This kid, if you want him, keep him. If you don't, that's your problem." She turned. No glance back. No look at her child. No goodbye to her mother. She walked out the door, each step cold and distant, like a stranger. The door slammed shut behind her. The sound pierced Grace's heart like a blade. The only things left in the room were the sound of rain on the eaves and Grace's quiet sobs. She sank to the floor, leaning back against the wall. Her face dropped into her hands, tears sliding silently down her wrinkled skin. She looked up, glancing toward the corner. Evan was still there. He hadn't lifted his head. He hadn't noticed his mother leaving. His eyes were steady, dry, unflinching. That lack of feeling hurt more than any cry could, because it showed that for Evan, being abandoned might already be something he'd gotten used to. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering through trembling lips, "Dear God, what do I do now? I'm old. He's not like other children. How am I supposed to care for him?" No answer came. Only the rain, still falling outside, without end. On the first day after Jessica left, the house seemed to fall out of rhythm. No more shouting, no more screaming. Only the ticking of the clock, and an old woman fumbling through the hours with a child who didn't respond to a single signal from the world around him. That afternoon, Grace made a simple plate of pasta for lunch. She boiled the noodles until soft and poured over a mild tomato sauce, something gentle for a child's taste. She placed the dish on the table, sat across from Evan, and gently pushed the plate toward him. "Eat, sweetheart. It's good pasta. I made it just for you." Evan didn't move. He sat still, rocking slightly. His eyes locked on the Rubik's Cube in his hands, not even glancing at the food. 1 minute passed, then 2. Grace waited patiently. Then, without warning, Evan swung his arm. The plate flew to the floor, tomato sauce splattering across the tiles and onto Grace's legs. He let out a scream, a sharp, pained cry, as if someone had hurt him. He grabbed his head with both hands, eyes tightly shut, his body seizing up in distress. Grace froze. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then she rushed over, wrapping her arms gently around the boy from behind. It's all right, darling. I'm here. No one's going to hurt you." But Evan didn't hear. He kept flailing, sobbing in harsh, broken gasps. The pasta lay on the floor, still warm, mixing with his tears and sweat. That night, as the sky began to churn with storm clouds, the first rumble of thunder rolled in from afar. Evan, lying in bed, suddenly jolted upright. He bolted from the bedroom, crashing into the wall in a panic. He screamed, pounding his fists against the cabinet, against the door, before collapsing to the floor. Grace rushed out, wrapping her arms around him, shielding his head, whispering over and over. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just thunder, only thunder. I'm right here." They sat together on the cold tile floor for over an hour. Eventually, Evan passed out from exhaustion. But Grace didn't move. She held him tightly, her tears trailing down her collar. The next morning, while Evan slept, she took out the old medical books she had kept stored away in the cupboard. Her eyes moved across each line. Asperger's syndrome, high-functioning autism, autism spectrum disorder. Terms she had read years ago during her nursing days, now resurfacing with a weight she had never imagined. They were no longer just theory. Her voice broke the silence of the room, soft and filled with doubt, as if confessing to herself. "He won't eat. He's terrified of thunder. He only plays with that little cube, all alone. What am I supposed to do?" She closed the book and looked toward the bedroom. Should I call Jessica? But she's gone. She doesn't want her son. She doesn't want her mother either. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Pale sunlight slipped through the window frame, casting a soft glow over the old, faded carpet. Grace sat down next to Evan, holding no book, no towel. She simply sat there, quiet and still. The boy was still turning the Rubik's Cube in his hands. His tiny fingers moved with astonishing speed. His eyes remained fixed, paying no attention to her presence. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out another cube. It was a Christmas gift she had once given to a young patient at the hospital. She hadn't imagined back then that one day she'd need it for her own grandson. She looked down at the cube and clumsily began to turn its sides, slowly, her eyes focused on the little squares. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, just loud enough for him to hear if he wanted to. "I'm not very good at this. Could you show me how?" Evan paused. He glanced at her. It wasn't a warm look, but it wasn't rejection either. Just a fleeting glance. Then he reached out and touched her cube. He turned a few sides, aligning the colors on one corner. Then he went back to his own. No words were exchanged. No smiles shared. But for Grace, it was a miracle. She looked at the cube he had touched, her eyes quietly misting over. A soft smile crossed her face as she spoke, almost to the waking morning itself. "All right then, one step at a time. You and me will learn how to live together." They sat side by side on the old carpet. One old woman and one little boy, both left with no one else, but now they had each other. Outside, life went on. Inside that small house, a new kind of love had just begun. That morning was nothing out of the ordinary. Outside, The sky was still gray, just like any other winter day in Houston. In the small kitchen, Grace sat at the wooden table by the window, holding a worn-out pencil and a crumpled piece of paper. Her eyes were fixed on a column of numbers, murmuring softly to herself as she calculated. The electric bill's gone up this month. I guess I'll have to take on a few more sewing jobs, sweetheart. Her voice was low, not directed at anyone in particular. Talking to herself had become a habit whenever Evan was nearby. The boy was sitting on the floor, head down, arranging colorful Lego pieces into strangely complex geometric shapes. No one had taught him how. No one had ever held a conversation and gotten a reply. Until a voice broke the silence. Small, steady, and oddly mechanical. "You're wrong! The math is wrong!" Grace froze, eyes wide with shock. Her hand trembled, and the pencil slipped from her fingers, landing on the table. She spun around, staring at Evan, her mouth open but speechless. What did you say?" Evan didn't look up. He crawled closer, pointed to a line of numbers on the paper. His voice remained soft, but unmistakably clear. "Here. It should be $175. You wrote 157? There was a long silence between them. Then the paper slipped from Grace's hand. She rushed forward and wrapped Evan in her arms. Tears streamed down her cheeks, unstoppable. She held his head to her chest, her voice trembling with emotion. "My grandson. You spoke? Oh God, I've waited so long to hear your voice." Evan didn't resist. He didn't return the hug either. But he stayed still. He didn't scream. He didn't pull away. And for Grace, that quiet acceptance was enough to tell her that a miracle had truly happened. 4 years later, the public library in Houston had become a familiar place for Grace and Evan. Once a week, she would walk him there, down several city blocks, carrying a cloth bag and a heart full of quiet patience. That day, the children's section was bustling. Kids were scattered everywhere, each with a comic book or coloring book in hand. Some sat cross-legged on the floor, giggling as they flipped through pages. But Evan was different. He walked straight to the far end of the hallway, toward the science section. His hand paused in front of a tall shelf, then reached up and pulled out a thick book with a sleek black cover. Introduction to Quantum Physics. He hugged the book to his chest and headed for a seat by the window. A young librarian passing by froze when she caught the title. "Sweetheart, you've picked up a college-level book by mistake. Let me grab something else for you." Evan didn't answer. He simply shook his head and held the book tighter. "I read this." The young woman frowned slightly and turned to look at Grace, who was approaching. "Ma'am, let me get him the magic school bus. This one really isn't suitable for kids." Grace stepped up, placing a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder. She looked at the librarian and spoke slowly, but with unmistakable firmness. "Thank you, but let him read. He understands it." The librarian chuckled, caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. "I'm sorry, but quantum mechanics? For an 8-year-old? You might be overindulging him." Grace didn't smile. Her eyes met the young woman's with calm intensity. They were eyes that had seen hundreds of lives flicker in and out in hospital rooms, had endured thousands of sleepless nights, and would not be swayed by shallow doubt. "I know my grandson better than anyone. Please don't limit him." She didn't wait for another word. She sat down in a nearby chair. Evan opened the book, his eyes locked onto the maze of equations and theories. He wasn't skimming. He was reading, line by line, and Grace sat beside him, silent, simply watching. For the first time in a long while, Evan's eyes were no longer vacant. There was a light in them, a light of understanding, of curiosity, of a world slowly unfolding before him. Late in the afternoon, the long hallway of the high school echoed with hurried footsteps. Faded sunlight streamed through the foggy windows, casting long shadows across the old tile floor. Evan walked slowly, clutching his backpack, his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Suddenly, 3 figures appeared at the end of the hall. They moved quickly, surrounding him near a wall by the emergency stairwell. One of them snatched his backpack, yanked it open, and turned it upside down. Books, papers, even his math notebook filled with dense formulas spilled out in a mess. Another boy picked up the notebook, flipped through its crowded pages, then burst out laughing. "Hey, freak! What kind of demon language is this? Think you're some genius or something? Here, solve this if you're so smart." He tore out a page and let the pieces fall like confetti at Evan's feet. The boy shrank down, covering his ears with both hands, muttering in panic. "Please, too loud. Please don't be loud." Another shoved him hard, slamming Evan's back against the wall. "Is he deaf or what? Did you hear that? Too loud? You want silence? This is school, not a library, freak." Their laughter echoed through the empty hallway. But then a voice rang out, sharp and unwavering, cutting through the noise. "What do you think you're doing to my grandson?" The boys turned, startled. At the far end of the hall stood Grace, gripping a rain-drenched umbrella in one hand, her eyes fierce and unflinching. She didn't wait for a response. She marched forward, every step steady, as if the weight of age had no hold on her. She knelt down and picked up each torn page, folding them gently. Then she straightened up, facing the boys, her gaze calm but steely. "My grandson's mind is something you'll never reach. Now leave before I take this to the principal." The boys exchanged awkward glances, then backed away. One of them muttered a curse under his breath, but none dared to linger. Grace turned to Evan. He was still trembling, arms wrapped around his knees. She sat beside him and pulled him gently into her arms. "Let's go home, sweetheart. This place doesn't deserve you." The next morning, the principal's office welcomed an unexpected guest. Grace sat across from 2 people, the principal in his crisp suit and Evan's homeroom teacher, her face lined with fatigue. Evan sat beside Grace, not looking at anyone, a pencil in hand as he absent-mindedly sketched geometric shapes across a blank sheet of paper. The teacher spoke first, her voice slow, laced with implication. "Mrs. Grace, we do care about Evan. But he's a little different. He struggles to fit in and often becomes a target for teasing. Perhaps a special education program would be more suitable for him." Grace gripped the armrest of her chair. Her voice trembled, but each word came through clearly. Being different doesn't mean being lesser. Have you ever looked at his math work? He can solve problems meant for seniors in high school. What he needs isn't pity. He needs respect and a safe environment. The principal pursed his lips, then placed his hand flat on the desk. "Mrs. Grace, the school simply doesn't have the capacity to provide individual attention for every student. The other kids are just being playful, nothing more." Grace stood up, her voice firm, each word deliberate. "Playful? That was bullying. And I, an old woman, can still recognize that. If this school can't guarantee my grandson's safety, I'll take this to the Board of Education. I won't let him suffer just because none of you want to face the truth." The room fell silent. Evan stopped drawing. He looked up at her, and for the first time, in his eyes, there was a flicker of light. Small, but unmistakable. The light of trust. 3 years later, Evan's small room had changed a great deal. The walls were freshly painted in a soft, calming white. Hundreds of sheets covered the surfaces, formulas, mind maps, and inspirational quotes. Every corner offered a different world he was exploring. Evan sat in front of his computer screen, his voice steady and confident as it filled the room. So, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle isn't about flawed instruments. It's about a fundamental property of nature itself. It was no longer the voice of a timid child. It was the voice of a young man who understood what he was saying. In the corner, Grace sat sewing a shirt, her head tilted slightly in his direction, eyes glowing with quiet pride. "I don't really understand it all, but hearing you talk, it sounds wonderful." Evan turned off the computer. He swiveled in his chair and looked at her for a moment. "You're tired. Go get some rest." The words were simple, but not empty. They were the product of 14 years spent learning how to listen and how to care. Grace smiled, stood up, and smoothed the hem of her blouse. "All right, I'll go to bed. You should rest soon, too." As she reached the doorway, a small voice called out behind her. "Thank you." She froze. She didn't turn around, but her hands clenched slightly. One tear fell to the floor. Then another. In that little house, after 14 years of struggle, a heart had finally opened. No longer a burden, no longer silent sacrifice, but a gift and joy. That morning, the Houston sky was perfectly clear. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow across the small house and making everything inside seem brighter. On the wooden table near the window sat an ivory envelope, perfectly placed. The red seal of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology stood out clearly in the top left corner. Inside was the letter that marked the end of a long journey. Grace stood before the mirror, carefully adjusting her collar. She was wearing a new dress, one she saved for truly special occasions. Her face, though etched with lines of age, looked unusually radiant. She said nothing, but her heart was beating faster than usual. Across the room, Evan was organizing his textbooks for his final online lesson before officially starting college. He had grown taller, his shoulders broader, his eyes steady and bright. The slim glasses on his face made his features even more defined. He showed little emotion, but the careful way he arranged each book reflected a quiet sense of purpose. Grace walked to the table and picked up the envelope. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were full of pride. An acceptance letter. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A full scholarship. I still can't believe it. My grandson? Evan paused and turned to her. A rare smile appeared on his face, soft and warm. His voice was calm and clear. It's more because of you. Grace shook her head. A tear rolled down her cheek, then another. She stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. No, it's your mind and your effort. I was just by your side. The landline phone rang unexpectedly. Grace reached out and picked up the receiver. On the other end was a journalist from the New York Times, someone who had been following Evan's story online. We would love to interview the young American prodigy with autism who was accepted to MIT. Evan shook his head gently. He didn't want the attention. But Grace felt differently. She couldn't hide her pride. Her voice lit up as she spoke about his journey, each word slow and deliberate, as if afraid the listener might miss the extraordinary nature of the boy he once was. My grandson isn't just brilliant. He is the strongest person I have ever known. A few months later, the campus of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was wrapped in the gentle chill of autumn. Crimson leaves lined the walkways, creating a scene that felt both peaceful and timeless. That day, the lecture hall was packed with students. At the front stood a familiar face, next to a large digital board filled with complex quantum physics equations. Evan spoke with a steady, deliberate voice. Each concept was broken down with clarity and precision, captivating even the senior students. His eyes did not seek contact, but his thoughts carried through every word he spoke, holding the entire room in quiet attention. After the lecture, one student discreetly recorded part of Evan's presentation and uploaded it online. The video quickly gained hundreds of thousands of views. Its title was simple, yet powerful: The Brilliant MIT Teaching Assistant Whose Lectures Leave You Speechless. The internet lit up. Major educational platforms reached out, eager to collaborate. One by one, videos began to appear in which Evan explained topics in physics, mathematics, and artificial intelligence. Each video garnered millions of views. Before long, Evan had become a phenomenon. The media called him a new symbol of resilient human intellect. In a small corner of America, in an old house in Houston, Grace sat in her usual armchair, holding an iPad, watching her grandson lecture. She didn't understand everything he said, but her eyes shone with quiet fulfillment. He deserves it, every bit of it. She whispered the words, not to boast, but to give thanks. Thanks for that moment, 14 years ago, when she chose not to let go. One weekend afternoon, just as the last light of day faded behind the trees at the end of the street, a taxi pulled up in front of Grace's small house. The calm air of the suburban neighborhood was abruptly broken by the sharp slam of a car door. The first to step out was a woman dressed in a vibrant designer dress, her makeup flawless, her hair styled in perfect curls. Jessica. Beside her was a man in a black suit, carrying a leather briefcase, his eyes cold and polished with the detachment of a lawyer. Jessica walked up to the gate and rang the bell. A smile stretched across her face, painted deep red with lipstick, sweet as honey, but so artificial it sent a chill down the spine. The door opened. Grace stood there. A single moment passed, heavy and breathless. Her face paled, her hands tightening slightly in front of her without thinking. Jessica tilted her head and stepped forward as if the last 14 years of silence had never existed. Her voice poured out like syrup. "Mom, I've missed you so much. I'm here to see my son." Grace took a step back, avoiding the hug that hung in the air, offered by the same daughter who once called her nothing but an obstacle. Her voice was hoarse, every word forced out with difficulty. "You, after 14 years of disappearing without a word, now you say you missed me? What do you want?" The man beside Jessica stepped forward and extended a gleaming business card. "Ma'am, my name is David Miller. I represent Ms. Jessica as her attorney. My client is here to exercise her right to see her son." Footsteps echoed from inside. Evan appeared in the doorway. He was taller now, composed, his gaze steady, though a cold haze lingered behind the lenses of his glasses. He looked at Jessica. No blink, no reaction, not a single word. In the days that followed, Jessica kept appearing in places where Evan would often go. She showed up at Starbucks, the park near his home, even at conferences where he was invited to speak. Every time, it was the same performance. Tears, apologies, carefully constructed stories meant to tug at the softest corners of his heart. That day at the cafe, Jessica sat across from Evan, her hand gently clasping his. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "My son, I'm so sorry. I left you back then because of your grandmother. She forced me out. She wouldn't let me stay. She called me a disgrace. I was too young. I didn't know what to do. I had no choice. Life was so hard. You have no idea." Evan didn't pull his hand away. He didn't nod either. He remained still, his eyes focused on the window beside them. His silence made it impossible to tell what he was thinking. On another day, Jessica slid a photo album across the table. The pictures had clearly been edited with care. In them, she was seen holding a child who looked strikingly like Evan as a little boy. "Look, I've always followed your life. I sent money to your grandmother to help raise you. Maybe she forgot. Or maybe she just didn't want to tell you." Another time, Jessica changed her approach. Her voice softened, now filled with affection, the kind a real mother might use. "You're famous now. You're making good money. I'm so proud of you. I'll move in, take care of you. Every child needs a mother, right?" Still, Evan said nothing. He simply looked at her. Not with emotion, not with judgment. His gaze was quiet, almost like a camera recording the moment. Not accepting, not rejecting, only observing. That evening, the little house returned to its usual quiet. The light in the living room glowed a soft yellow. Grace sat motionless in her familiar cushioned chair. The shirt she had been sewing lay unfinished in her lap, needle and thread still caught between her fingers. But she no longer had the focus to continue. Evan came down from his room and quietly sat beside her. He placed his hand on the table and spoke in his usual calm, steady voice. "Did you ever tell my mother to leave?" The question landed like a blade, slicing clean and sudden through her chest. She flinched. Her eyes widened for a moment. Her throat tightened. A surge of anger rose inside her. She wanted to shout, to say no, to scream that Jessica had walked away on her own, chasing after a man who wanted nothing to do with a child. She wanted to cry out that she had carried it all. Every meal, every meltdown, every silent year without a single call. But then she looked into Evan's eyes. Clear, quiet, still as the surface of a lake just before it shatters. And she knew. One angry word now could tear apart the trust she had spent more than a decade trying to build. She took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "That was a long time ago. Your mother and I both had our own struggles. You don't need to dwell on it. Just focus on your studies." She gently wrapped her arms around him. Her cheek rested against his shoulder, and though the tears streamed down her face, she didn't let them touch his shirt. She only held on, just a little tighter, as if to protect the last pieces of the trust between them. Inside, she was screaming silently. "Dear God, she's poisoning him against me. She's turning me into the villain in his eyes. But what can I do? If I tell him the truth, will he be able to bear it? His heart has always been so fragile." She closed her eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from fear that if she opened them, she would have to face that look of doubt once more. In a room bathed in the stark white light of overhead fixtures, Grace sat back in a leather chair, her hands tightly clasped together. On the table lay a thick stack of documents marked with colored tabs. Across from her, attorney Barbara Hill, a middle-aged woman with a firm expression and sharp eyes, turned each page in silence. Her voice broke the stillness after a few moments of thought. "Mrs. Grace, the situation we're facing is not in our favor. The other side has come prepared with carefully curated evidence. They have bank statements showing regular transfers, photographs that, based on our preliminary checks, appear to be professionally edited, and even statements from individuals claiming they saw Jessica visiting Evan during the holidays." Grace said nothing. Her hands gripped the edge of her shawl so tightly the veins stood out on her skin. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "None of it is true. I never received a single cent from her. My grandson has never mentioned her or received anything from that woman." Barbara Hill gave a small nod. "I believe you, but the court doesn't work on belief. It runs on evidence. One more thing. Judges in Texas often lean toward the biological mother, unless we can prove she was entirely neglectful. With those documents, the court might be persuaded that she made some effort. Grace lowered her head. A heavy breath escaped her lips. She turned toward her grandson. "What do you think? If you truly want to be with your mother, I won't stop you." Evan remained still, his eyes fixed on the paper in front of him. He showed no visible reaction. After a moment, he spoke slowly. "You don't have to worry." He stood, folded the paper neatly, and slipped it into his backpack. "I'm heading home. There's something I need to take care of." That day, the courtroom of the Houston family court felt unusually heavy, the air thick with tension. On the judge's bench, a middle-aged man gave a soft tap of the gavel, signaling the beginning of the hearing. On the petitioner's side, Jessica wore a modest dress. Her hair was neatly tied, her makeup subtle, carefully designed to evoke hardship and remorse. She sat close to her attorney, David Miller, her eyes glistening as she looked across the room at Evan, who sat beside Grace on the other side. Attorney Miller stood first. He walked to the center of the courtroom with steady composure. "Your Honor, my client is a mother who has endured significant pain. She was prevented, by her own mother, from having access to her child. She was forced to leave in order to survive, but she never once forgot her son. For 14 years, she quietly supported him from a distance. Today, all she asks is the chance to make things right." Jessica rose to speak. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. Her voice quivered, carefully laced with sorrow. "Your Honor, I know I was wrong. I left my child when he was still so small. But I was also a victim. I was cast out, labeled a disgrace. I was young and lost. But I never stopped loving him. I just want a chance to make amends, to be his mother again." She presented a collection of photographs, financial records, remittance receipts, and several printed witness statements. Every detail had been carefully arranged, seemingly flawless. Grace sat motionless. Her heart tightened in her chest. She knew exactly what those papers meant. Each document was like a thin blade, slowly slicing into the quiet life she had built with the boy she had raised with every ounce of strength she had left. She turned to look at Evan. He remained still, his head slightly bowed, showing no visible reaction. His eyes were calm, as if listening without truly hearing. A flicker of fear crossed Grace's heart. She wondered whether this grandson, who had always lived through logic and reason, might be swayed. Everyone was waiting for a word from Evan, and waiting to see whether the wind of truth could clear away the curtain of deception that had been so carefully drawn. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The judge turned his gaze toward Evan. His voice, calm but resolute, cut through the heavy silence. "Evan, do you wish to live with your biological mother?" Evan slowly raised his head. His eyes scanned the room. The first gaze settled on Jessica, the woman sitting across from him with an expression of desperate hope. Her hands clutching the edge of her dress, lips pressed tight, as if waiting for a victorious verdict. Then his eyes shifted toward Grace. He looked at her for a long time, a very long time. That gaze seemed to cut through layers of memory, reaching into every shared meal, every stormy night, every time she wrapped her arms around him as he cried in silence. But that same gaze made Grace tremble. Her fingers gripped the armrest, her breath uneven. Thoughts raced through her mind in tangled waves. Was he wavering? Had he started to see her as old, frail, no longer enough? Jessica was younger, beautiful, and had returned just as his life was shining brightest. "Dear God," she whispered inwardly, "is he truly going to leave me?" Jessica smiled, a triumphant smile, the kind that belonged to someone who believed the ending had already been written. Then Evan spoke. His voice rang out, clear and steady. There was no hesitation. She is lying. The courtroom stirred. Someone in the gallery gasped softly. Attorney David Miller furrowed his brow. Jessica froze in place. But Evan did not pause. He stood up and walked to the center of the room. She is not fit to be a mother. In 14 years, I have not received a single moment of care from that woman. The evidence she presented is fabricated. He opened his bag and pulled out a small USB drive, handing it to Barbara Hill. She immediately connected it to the projector. Images appeared on the large screen at the center of the courtroom. Displayed on the screen was a detailed timeline of Evan's life, beginning from when he was 4 years old until the present day. Every year, every month, every milestone was clearly documented and supported by verified records. The first image to appear was Grace's handwritten journal. Line by line, in careful penmanship, it recorded mealtimes, fevers, doctor's visits, school tuition, prescription receipts, and even nap schedules. Every entry aligned precisely with her bank statements, savings account records, and hospital payment slips. Next came the metadata analysis of the photos Jessica had submitted. Evan pointed at the screen. All of these images have timestamps indicating they were created only a few months ago. The EXIF data is intact. These pictures were taken, edited, and printed after I became publicly known. The final piece of evidence was an old article from the Houston Chronicle, the headline bold at the top. Gambling ring busted, involvement of high school dropouts confirmed. The names Johnny and Jessica were listed among those arrested. The date of the incident coincided exactly with one of the days Jessica claimed she had been sending money to support me. Evan looked directly at Jessica. His voice had turned cold, almost devoid of emotion. The probability that every detail she described occurred without leaving a single trace in my digital history is 0.0047%. Mathematically, that qualifies as impossible. She was absent. Completely. Jessica sprang to her feet, shouting as if she had lost control. Her face flushed red, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Ungrateful! You're my son! I gave birth to you! I carried you in my body! Evan remained calm, unmoving. He looked her in the eye and replied, his voice steady and measured. Giving birth to a child does not automatically make someone a mother. He turned his head, directing his gaze toward Grace. This time, his voice was no longer cold. There was a tremor in it, the first sign of something deeper breaking through. My mother is the one who cooked my meals, tucked me in at night, taught me my first words, and stood up for me when the world called me a monster. That person is my grandmother. Grace could no longer hold back her tears. Her eyes were red, her lips pressed tight. Streams of tears rolled down her cheeks. But they were not the tears of sorrow she had once known. They were tears of release, of overwhelming joy, after years of silent endurance. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. A truth had been laid bare. A battle had come to an end. And a grandmother's heart had been healed by the one declaration she had waited a lifetime to hear. No one in the room spoke. The only sound was the soft tapping of the court clerk's keyboard, echoing through a silence thick with emotion. The judge, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, sat silently behind the bench. He held the thick stack of printed documents drawn from the USB drive Evan had submitted, turning each page slowly and meticulously. When he finally looked up, his expression was no longer neutral. His eyes carried a stern, unyielding intensity. Based on the verified evidence presented, especially the undeniable digital records provided by Evan himself, the court finds that the defendant, Jessica, has knowingly submitted falsified documents, made false statements under oath, and, most critically, demonstrated a prolonged and willful neglect of the child she gave birth to. His voice rose slightly, firm and unmistakably final. Therefore, the court hereby rules as follows. All claims by the defendant, Jessica, seeking to regain custody, are denied in full. Full and sole legal guardianship of Evan shall remain with his grandmother, Grace. Furthermore, the defendant's actions will be referred to the criminal justice system for investigation regarding perjury and the use of falsified documents. The sound of the gavel striking the block echoed sharply through the courtroom. In that moment, Grace felt as though she had been released from a long, unrelenting nightmare. She gripped Attorney Barbara's hand tightly, tears spilling freely from her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of exhaustion or sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of gratitude, and of a profound, soul-deep relief. She turned to Evan, unable to speak, but her eyes, filled with tenderness and pride, seemed to hold the entire world within them, offering it to the grandson who had just given her something she had never asked for yet had always longed to receive. Validation. The hallways of the family court echoed with the hurried footsteps of legal staff and attendees quietly dispersing after the hearing. But amid the fading crowd, a sudden, jarring scene unfolded. Jessica, who had tried to wear the mask of a gentle, remorseful mother during the trial, had completely unraveled. She was being escorted from the courtroom by courthouse officers. Her hands were restrained, but her mouth remained unchecked, spewing venom. As she caught sight of Grace and Evan stepping through the main doors, she erupted like a cornered animal. "You're proud of yourself now, aren't you? Taking my son away. How noble of you. You want him to take care of your old dying self, is that it? You pathetic, wrinkled parasite?" Grace stood still. She didn't react, but Evan looked directly at Jessica, his face unreadable. Jessica began to lose control. Her fury rising, she spun toward Evan, her eyes red with rage and humiliation. "You ungrateful bastard. I should have aborted you before you were even born. You think you're something special? You're just an autistic freak, a burden, a mistake. Without me, you'd be nothing, just another broken piece of society." Her words ripped through the air like a blade. A few people nearby stopped. Some shook their heads, others raised their phones to record. Grace stood frozen. Her face had gone pale, her shoulders trembling. But this time, she didn't cry. She didn't back away. She stepped forward. Her gaze had lost all trace of weakness. In that moment, she was no longer just a frail grandmother. She was a warrior who had survived every pain life could throw at her. "Be quiet." Jessica froze. Even the officers holding her paused. Grace's voice cut through the air like steel. She pointed directly at Jessica. Every word that followed came from years of silence, now breaking free with righteous fury and deep contempt. "You have no right to call him your son. You never did. You are nothing but the shadow of selfishness and lies. You never knew what it meant to love. You never gave, never protected. The only things you ever carried were greed and envy." She took a breath. Her voice softened, but it was thick with emotion. "And him," she said, gesturing toward Evan, "is a child who grew up in pain, but rose above it and became a light. He is the pride of this family. I stayed silent to protect him, but from now on, I will never let you hurt him again." She turned and took Evan's hand. "Leave, Jessica, and spend the rest of your life living with the disgust you created for yourself." The hallway fell silent once more. No one spoke. Only the sound of Jessica being dragged away remained. her mouth mumbling incoherent curses, while the weight of justice and defeat clung to her like iron chains. Morning sunlight slanted through the kitchen window of Grace's house, casting a warm glow over her hands as she slowly peeled an apple. The small TV on the corner shelf had been on since early morning, but instead of the usual cooking show, today it played a special news bulletin from Houston 7. A bold red headline filled the screen, "Exposing the Phantom Mother, a story of grandmotherly love and unthinkable betrayal." Grace looked up. She gently set the apple down and reached for the remote, turning up the volume. The voice of a female anchor filled the quiet room, steady and deliberate. "We have just received footage showing Jessica M., the defendant in the recent custody case against her own mother, verbally assaulting and screaming at her son in the hallway of the Houston family court. The incident has stunned the online community and gone viral over the past 3 days." The screen shifted to grainy cell phone footage. It showed Jessica thrashing against officers, her face twisted in rage, her mouth spewing venom. Her son stood still, just feet away, and Grace's voice, firm and unyielding, echoed through the hallway like a thunderclap. The clip sent a shiver through viewers across the country. On Twitter, one user wrote, "That autistic boy lived in silence for 14 years, then stood before the world and unmasked the woman who claimed to be his mother. I cried for him and his grandmother." A Facebook post that had been shared tens of thousands of times read, "This woman betrayed not only her mother and child, but insulted every special needs kid out there. She deserves everything coming to her." The report continued, shifting to the official legal outcome. According to the ruling released yesterday afternoon, Jessica M. received a 2-year suspended sentence. She was fined in civil court and ordered to complete 600 hours of community service. While she avoided immediate jail time, her criminal record would now carry the mark of perjury and deliberate obstruction of the legal process. The news segment did not end there. It continued with a statement from the school where Jessica M. had once worked as an English teaching assistant. A school representative said, "Following a thorough review of the incident, we have terminated Ms. Jessica M.'s employment due to ethical violations inconsistent with our institution's educational standards." Another report from a popular job listing website revealed that her name had been added to a local employer blacklist. When potential recruiters searched her profile, dozens of articles surfaced alongside a viral video showing her screaming at her son like someone unhinged. In the small kitchen, Grace turned off the television. She didn't smile, and no tears fell from her eyes. She simply rose from her chair and placed a hand gently on Evan's shoulder. He had just stepped out of his room, his expression as calm and steady as ever. Evan looked at her and spoke slowly, as if he had heard everything, yet remained untouched by it. "Shall we have breakfast?" Grace nodded. "Yes. I boiled some sweet potatoes. Would you like some?" He gave a quiet nod. Then the two of them walked to the table together. Outside, social media continued to surge with outrage and noise. But inside the small house, once burdened by years of silence, there was now a pocket of peace that nothing could disturb. Jessica had vanished from their lives like a thin trail of smoke after the storm. Inside the small house, the soft, yellow light filled the living room with warmth. In Grace's hands was an unfinished sweater, knit from light brown wool. Her eyes followed each stitch slowly, while her thoughts drifted quietly through the memories of the past. Footsteps echoed softly on the wooden stairs. Evan came down from his room. He wasn't dressed in his usual academic clothes, but instead wore a simple gray sweater and jeans. In his hands, he held a thick envelope. He walked over and gently placed it on the table in front of her. "It's for you," he said, his voice calm and steady. "A bank card. The password is the day you brought me home." Grace froze for a moment, then looked up at him. Her face showed a flicker of surprise before softening into a gentle smile. "I already have my pension," she said. "You should keep it for yourself." Evan shook his head. His eyes held quiet determination. "No, it's all for you. You gave up everything." He paused. His throat moved slightly, as if pushing down a tide of emotion. It took him a few seconds before he could speak again. "I know I wasn't an easy child. I know I was difficult to reach. I know I made you tired, maybe even afraid." Grace looked at her grandson, her eyes already glistening. She gently set the half-knit sweater aside. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying the weight of truth. "Never, Evan. I never saw you as a burden." Evan looked up. For the first time, he didn't look away. His voice trembled slightly, but he kept going, holding his ground. "I know. That's why, thank you." He took a slow breath, as if drawing strength from every moment he had lived through in the past 14 years. "Thank you for every meal, for standing up for me at school, for all the nights you stayed awake when I couldn't sleep, for staying silent when my mother lied. You endured everything to protect me. I love you." It was the first time those 3 words had ever been spoken. Grace couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She rose from her seat and wrapped her arms tightly around Evan. She didn't say anything in return. She didn't need to. She just held him and wept, deep and quiet sobs rising from the part of her soul where pain had stayed for far too long. They were tears of joy, of release, of a long journey finally understood and finally repaid. Autumn had arrived in Houston, bringing with it a gentle sun and the crispness of cooler air. The small house still stood in its old place, but now it wore a peacefulness that felt almost unfamiliar. There were no more weary sighs, no sleepless nights, no silent fears hiding behind someone's eyes. Evan continued his studies at MIT. Now a respected doctoral candidate, he had become a prominent figure in the academic world with widely cited research papers. Yet he never strayed far from his roots. Every weekend he was able to, he returned to Houston. And when that wasn't possible, Grace would travel to Cambridge and spend a month there, watching the red leaves fall, enjoying warm soup, and listening to her grandson explain nuclear physics using the simplest words he could choose. Life was no longer difficult for Grace. She no longer stayed up late sewing, no longer counted pennies before paying bills. Her mornings now began with the scent of coffee, the sound of birds outside, and a text from her grandson wishing her a peaceful day. One afternoon, she and Evan took a walk through the city's Central Park. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden patterns along the paved path. Evan no longer walked behind her. He no longer stayed silent. He walked beside her, now and then leaning down to point at an early blooming flower or a cloud shaped like something curious. He explained things to her in a calm, simple voice, and she smiled. She didn't need to understand everything. Just listening was enough. Their small house was no longer a fortress bracing itself against the world. It had become a true home, a place where every judgment and wound had been softened and undone by love. They hadn't just survived. They had lived, and they had lived in a way that honored everything they had been through. They had found their own paradise, right here on this earth. Some children are born not to walk an easy path, and some adults, even if they are not biological parents, still choose to stay. They choose to sacrifice, to love unconditionally, asking for nothing in return. Grace was not a hero. She was simply a grandmother. But it was her patience, her quiet strength, and her unwavering love that gave a child once seen as different the chance to grow into his full potential, with dignity and purpose. If you've ever felt alone in this world, if you've ever believed that no one could truly understand or accept you, I hope you remember this truth. Somewhere out there is always someone like Grace, someone who will reach out and hold your hand quietly, without needing to say a word. And if you are a parent or a caregiver to a special child, may you never lose faith in the power of persistence and unconditional love. Sometimes, just one person who believes is enough to change an entire life. If this story brought tears to your eyes or stirred something deep within you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Revenge Diary for more real, emotional, and deeply human stories like this one. Thank you for walking with us right up to the very end.